time, place, relativity, experience. These are the key concepts in land art. Land art is one aspect of a whole kind of matrix of revolutionary art practices that developed in the 60s, which we might call conceptual art. Conceptual art is a way of making art that really prioritizes the idea and the process over the finished object. So instead of considering a carving made of marble or a painting in oil on canvas, we think about processes, ideas, and how those are played out, not necessarily in the gallery. In the case of land art, these ideas are played out in nature, in the landscape. I think there's a fundamental difference between land art as manifested in America in the 60s and 70s and what was happening in Europe at the same time. So a lot of the American artists were using the great open spaces of the American deserts to make these huge experiential structures. But in Europe, where the landscape is much more worked over, it's kind of somehow more intensively historicized, artists tended to make much more ephemeral gestures. So that might be Richard Long simply inscribing a line across a meadow by walking backwards and forwards. The idea that walking can be a way of making art is beautiful and revolutionary. What Long is interested in is making very simple gestures that seem to carry great philosophical weight. To inscribe a line on the ground with footsteps is in a way registering your existence in the world, on the world. It's a way of making something out of nothing. There's a kind of beautiful poetry to that, I think. And this very simple gesture kind of seems to me to say something about the way that we touch and change the world with our presence. Land art has a long-reaching and important legacy, and a lot of the artists who first came to prominence in the 60s and 70s continue to make fascinating and innovative work. But there are also a number of younger artists who have kind of taken inspiration from those earlier gestures. Julian Sherry, a young Swiss artist, has made work in remote places around the world, often engaging in what might be called quite sort of absurd or quixotic gestures. For example, he travelled to the Arctic and, using ice climbing equipment, climbed onto a huge iceberg and then attempted to melt the iceberg using a blowtorch. Of course, as Sherry attempts to melt the ice, it freezes again immediately. For me, the work is about the absurdity of the gesture, but the image of the artist standing precariously on this huge mass of ice in the middle of an empty sea is very moving. It says something about the contemporary condition of the climate and man's place in the world. And as we live through what may well be the late Anthropocene, the time of ongoing climate crisis, I think that an art form that draws our attention to the planet that we live on is of real significance and importance.